Hi everyone, welcome back to another video of our FEMTalks series. My name is Shrishti and I'm one of the VPs of Outreach at Booster, and I'm here with my Outreach Director Yelena to speak with Fotini. So let's get right into it. So Fotini, why don't you start with telling us a little bit about yourself?
So I am what people call a negotiation consultant. That means very little to most folks until you know that I'm the one that big giant Fortune 50 companies hire to either help them through high stakes negotiations or train their teams to be more effective negotiators if they're bleeding profits. Or these days I spend a lot of my time going in and speaking to large groups. So from the stage, doing an hour of helping people through their everyday negotiations, and then I moonlight as a guest lecturer whenever I can, generally at the Schulich School of Business, but I have been doing guest lectures all over the place these days.
Yeah, that's
Thank
really
you.
cool. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for sharing. And you mentioned that you have your own sort of advisory and like negotiation practice. So like what motivated you to take that leap and start and get into like advisory?
So I started my career in consumer goods. So I was negotiating with Walmart on a regular basis. And then a company was hired to train me and my sales team to be more effective at negotiating. And it was actually the company that went, you should really be doing what we do. And I was like, yeah, sure, someday when I've got more experience. It was my I had I had just gotten out of my MBA maybe 5 years earlier. I hadn't even hit 30 yet. And I was like, who's going to listen to me? What CEO is going to listen to me telling them what to do on how to be a more effective negotiator? But it took them a year and they finally convinced me to come on board. And after I stayed with them for a year, because what I figured was leaving a very comfortable and stable industry for something like consulting, I figured worst case scenario, if I hate it, I leave here with a really great skill set and probably a pretty great network if they're going to send me to all of these companies that they say they're going to send me to. And after almost 5 years with them, I realized it just wasn't the place to match my values any longer. And I quit because I knew I would get a job. And I knew I had a really phenomenal network of people that as soon as I made the announcement on LinkedIn that I'm no longer with this organization, stay tuned. I'm still figuring out what's going to come next. And I thought I would take a break and so on. I had all these people in my inbox going, so when are you going to come and work for us? And I was like, I don't really want to work for you for all these like lovely teams that I've worked with in the past. They said, okay, well, if you're not going to work for us, then when are you going to come back and help our team? And so it was really just these really great relationships that I had built where I thought I was just going to go back and do a favor to a client who'd become a friend. And that turned into another favor. And I just thought, I'll do this until I have to get a real job. And it's been almost 9 years of evolving into the consulting stuff and then the bit of the training stuff and then the public speaking stuff and then HarperCollins reaching out and going, we think you have a book in you, and the Schulich School of Business going, hey, do you want to come back and teach MBA students? And all of these things just came up because I didn't actually seek them out. So it wasn't a conscious decision that I made. It was, how can I keep helping people? I was putting stuff out there on LinkedIn. I was sharing insights with folks. I was going above and beyond for my clients. And that's what's just kind of evolved into a very natural career path for me, which is kind of cool. Because if you'd asked me 10 years ago, what are you going to be doing 10 years from now? I don't think I could have even dreamed this up. So it's a bit of a weird one.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I feel like some of the best things that happen in life were totally unplanned for. So it's really interesting how your little leap of faith resulted in such a really cool opportunity for you. But you did mention that you were kind of in the corporate world for a little bit. So I was wondering, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced specifically as a woman in the corporate world, and how did you overcome these challenges?
So, I mean, I'm still in the corporate world, just in a different capacity. But
Mhm.
when I was going day to day to an office and I was involved in mostly sales stuff, and then that's the one where you're putting yourself out there on a pedestal in the spotlight, making these presentations and having to pitch not only to clients like Walmart, but internally, whether it was to your marketing team or your senior leadership team or whatever it was. And the biggest challenge I always had was, at least back then, I looked quite young. And I was always the youngest in the room, and I was generally the only woman in the room for a lot of this kind of stuff. So I was put on special special projects quite frequently. And I knew when I walked into these rooms that people were going to look at me with some skepticism. And so that was the biggest mental hurdle. Like I would go to work sometimes and I would do my makeup differently, or I would tie my hair back and I'd be asking my male colleagues, do I look older today? Do you think they're going to take me more seriously today? Do you think I'm still going to get that, that challenge of, well, who are you to teach us how to do what we do? Or, what do you know about this? We have way more experience than you do. That was always the biggest challenge for me. So it was really the mental hurdle of not having to overcompensate for that, not feeling like I needed to actually do something about it. It was just feeling like I deserve to be here. I'm here because I'm really good at what I do. I'm here because I'm really intelligent. I'm here because somebody saw something that I did that said, you deserve to be here. And so it really took a while for me to warm up to that. Like I never shied away from a challenge as an overachiever by nature. That wasn't ever going to hold me back, but it could create some mental stumbling blocks when you've got that imposter syndrome or when you're worried about people's reactions and so on. So it did take some time to quiet that annoying voice in my head. But I'd say that was always the biggest challenge, was just not being taken seriously because you look different, you sound different, you have a name that people can't pronounce, you just don't fit the typical profile of what they're expecting when you show up. But that's okay. And in fact, I turned that into a strength because they went, oh, how does this person who I wasn't expecting know this much about, this particular area? Or how does she know how to run an Excel analysis so well? Or where did she get that crazy insight? So it's almost like this surprise was actually my secret weapon. And that gave me some real confidence to take that to the next level.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear how you were able to like take like these prejudices and like stereotypes and like overcome that. So it's really inspiring to hear. And then I guess just moving on from your industry experience to like academia, that's obviously a significant shift. So I know you said that you started getting into guest lectures because people were reaching out to you, but what sort of inspired you to make this transition? And along with that, like what were some of the challenges that you encountered?
I mean, I really loved my time as a student. I look back really fondly, especially on my time as an MBA student, because I did it a bit backwards. So I did it straight out of my undergrad and went straight into the MBA program. So I had a bit of a unique background that I had a business going into school. But when I think back to how useful that time was in my career exploration and understanding what is the next step and the lessons I gained from the people around me and the practical skill set, it really, for me, my experience as a student wasn't about the curriculum. It really wasn't about learning things from a textbook. It was learning things from my peer group. It was learning from being involved in things. And I wanted to make sure that what I provided to students was going to be as practical as everything that I took away from my MBA experience. And so one of the great things about teaching negotiations, it's not theoretical, it's as practical as it gets. And so to be able to have the invitation to go back and now help people at a fork in the road where I know statistically the decisions you make at that early stage, that first negotiation when you come out of school, can have a dramatic impact for the rest of your life. Like there are studies that equate that one singular first negotiation out of school could mean 8 years of early retirement if you take that opportunity. If you don't, can you imagine? I could not imagine these students having to retire 8 years later because they're missing those important skills. So being able to inspire and teach at that kind of pivotal moment for me was, it sounded like a lot of fun. I missed the classroom too. I was doing so much of that intense war room, sitting in a room with executives on whiteboards and mapping out strategies, that it was actually kind of a treat to be able to go in and teach again and get asked questions about really practical matters that were going to make an impact in someone's individual life, as opposed to, the corporate bucket of money. So that for me was the real motivating factor to go back. I don't teach as much as I used to now. My schedule is sort of erratic. So I'm not doing the 12-week semester long stuff. That's why I'm dropping in and doing more guest lectures, and I truly miss it. So I want to find a way back to doing that type of stuff. The challenge with doing academia is you have to grade things. And so there's this oxymoron, this juxtaposition of what I know about adult learning and what I tell my clients in the corporate training world is, I need you to make mistakes. I need you to do it here. I need you to make lots of them so that you're not making those mistakes when the stakes are much higher. And so I'm encouraging people to make mistakes, but as a student, you want to get straight A's, or you need to keep your scholarship, or you need to, whatever it is, hit this, overachiever hurdle that you have in your brain. And so how do you do that? And so it was very challenging to find the ways to give them these opportunities for evaluation without making them feel like failures. It was also a big challenge to tie it into the expectations of the types of things that academia is expecting. So we made tweaks, like things like, instead of doing an academic paper on, tell me about, 5 different studies on negotiation, it was, tell me about your personal experience. So the end of the semester, their paper was about, tell me who you were when you started and who you are now when you're finishing, and what are you going to do differently. So there was no way to cheat it, because you have to write about your own personal experience. And that was rewarding for me, but it was also rewarding for them. So if they put the effort in, it was a very easy way to get the appropriate mark at the end of the semester, just to show me you're putting effort in. And there was a lot more stuff that I had to do to mark them on participation versus a test outcome. We had to sprinkle in some of that stuff, but that was the real challenge, because in the real world, when I'm in the non-academic world, I shouldn't say the real world, in the non-academic world, when I'm teaching folks in a corporate environment, these skills, I'm not grading them. I'm actually making sure that I've seen a change. I'm showing them videos and breaking it down and showing them who they were before and after, and how what they're doing applies, and how they're seeing success on video. So those things are very hard to mimic in the classroom when you have 45 people versus an intimate group of 8 in the corporate world. So trying to find those ways to get that same learning with the constraints of academia, and understanding that it has to be practical and there's grades and all that kind of stuff. I do think that there's potential for things to evolve in the academic world to match the pedagogy, like how do people actually learn, and what's going to be practical when people get into their careers.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you also bring up a really great point about the practicality of negotiations. And I'm sure, like, in your career, you've had to negotiate a lot with clients, with your coworkers, or with your boss. So how has that industry experience influenced your teaching style? And like, how do you bring that into the classroom?
Through a lot of storytelling. So I bring my personal experience in through storytelling all the time, because in the MBA, it's a lot of case study learning.
Mhm.
And I'd say that's now becoming the case in many other disciplines as well, whether it's medicine and the like. So I find that case study is more interesting when they can connect it to something real versus a made up scenario of folks. And what I found was, as I continued to teach, the wait list for my class kept getting bigger and bigger every semester. And I was hearing the feedback of students who were coming in going, well, I want to learn from the lady who did it at Walmart. If she can do it with them, then I know I'm going to find it useful. So people, I think, really embrace the practical element of, hey, if it works in those tough real life scenarios, I know it's going to be a place to work for me. So I gave, you have to do the lecture of, okay, here's the principle I want to teach you. And it's the same way I would do it in the corporate world. But when it comes down to, here's how it actually plays out in the real world. And that's when they go, oh, and their jaws drop. They're like, there's that much practical application to this. Well, now I'm bought in. And so storytelling is something I do from the stage in when I'm doing motivational speeches. It's something that I do in corporate trainings. And it's also something that I found was really effective in the academic world as well. But just like in the corporate world, it was also practical application. So my students always have a chance to practice with someone else in the room, whether it's before class, after class, or during class. It can't just be read it from a book and learn about it. It can't be theory. It's got to be, you learn it, now you have to practice it, and let's talk about what you just practiced. Because without that, I feel like there's a really big gap in learning that is very hard to overcome.
Yeah, definitely. I think your real world experience and industry experience provides like a unique experience in the classroom for a lot of the students. And just touching on like what you teach in the classroom, what's sort of some advice that you have for students and specifically young women who are like about to enter the workforce? And then what skills or mindset should they cultivate in order to be successful in their careers in the future?
I know this is going to sound so cliche, but it is to be a really great listener. But you need to match that with assertiveness. And so I tell people all the time when I speak to general audiences, the biggest piece of advice I have for them is to shut up because people will talk themselves out of something. The caveat I throw in there for women is not to just shut up and be quiet, not to shut up and be a wallflower, not to shut up and let someone steamroll over you, but it's to be there to listen to what they're telling you so that you can use that to your advantage. Because we're going to find ourselves in positions where people are going to be ridiculous, people are going to be jerks, they're going to be biased, they're going to say things that are wrong, they're going to try and take credit for something that you did, they're going to say things that are just out of left field and so on. They're going to say things that are offensive. So when that time comes, if you are sitting there and listening and paying attention and showing up with your body language in a way that says, I deserve to be here, instead of having your brain go into overdrive and go, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? Which shows very different body language. When you show up and say, I deserve to be here, and you are listening to everything that they say and do, now all of a sudden you have a superpower where you can take those words and you can use it to your advantage. So you can tell somebody, when you said this, what did you mean? Or how do you think the client would feel about that? Or, based on what you said, here's how I would handle this situation. Now people are feeling like they've been heard. So it's a great stroke to their ego, or they're feeling accountable because you paid attention. You're using what they said, what came out of their mouths to your advantage. So I'd say that's a really big one for a lot of women in the workplace. It's something that has worked for me time and time again, because the temptation for many of us is to either shut down entirely or to get really defensive, right? We get very reactive in that room, and your reaction could be a completely polar opposite from somebody else. But what if instead you could take that time to pause mentally, press what I call your mental pause button and go, okay, I just heard what they said. I'm going to pause and consider, how do I leverage this and how do I use this to my advantage to make sure that I am getting what I need out of this conversation, to make sure that I am not being called too aggressive, to being sure that I am seen as somebody credible and trustworthy in the way that I show up, in the way that I use my words. If I take that pause, I have a moment to exercise self-control and choose what I want to say and how I want to take what they just said on board. But if I'm getting reactive and shutting down, I'm never going to be assertive enough to show them that I deserve my place there. If I'm getting really defensive, they're going to start attacking me for other reasons, or I may say something that I'm going to regret. So it's finding that middle ground of, how can I press my pause button? How can I use what they've said to my advantage? How can I make sure that I show them that I deserve to be here and that I am paying close attention, for better or for worse? And there's a huge advantage in that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's some really great advice, and advice that we don't tend to hear often as women in the workforce. So thank you so much for sharing. Do you have any last words for our booster network or anything else you'd like to share?
Well, one thing that I get quite often, like every time I ever had office hours, it was always women in my office hours. It was never men. And it was always women going, are you sure I can negotiate this salary? It had never anything to do with the rest of the curriculum. It was all about an upcoming job negotiation. And there's this doubt of, what if I say something and they rescind the offer? What if I say something and they hate me, or they think I'm greedy, or any of those consequences, these fears that we all have, these fears that are all valid. And my answer to them is, yes, you can. The answer is, you're there for a reason, because they're worried, well, if I try to negotiate this, they'll go to the next person on the list. And I'm going, but will they? Because they chose you out of those 500 people who are applying for that same job. They chose you for a reason. And if you are conducting this conversation in a collaborative way, if you are pausing instead of being reactive, if you are asking great questions, if you are demonstrating your worth, then there's no reason why they should rescind the offer. If they do, when you're doing all of the things that I recommend to people that I talk about in my book, that I, talk about from the stage, if you search my name and you watch all sorts of videos, everything I talk about is collaborative negotiation. If you are following those principles and they do rescind an offer, or they do behave in a way that says they call you greedy or bitchy or aggressive or any of those things, then let me assure you, you have just dodged a major bullet. You have just avoided a really difficult career path with someone who doesn't deserve to have you. And at this stage in your career, I guarantee you, as much as you're worried about student debt and all of the other things in your brain and making sure you get a head start, I guarantee you there will be other opportunities out there. So take that moment to understand your worth. Take that moment to make sure that you show them that you deserve to be there, that you are exercising the principles, and to make sure that you are uncovering any potential red flags before you find yourself in a situation that you don't deserve to be in the first place.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing that. That was super valuable. And that brings us to an end for this FEM talk. Thank you so much for coming online and chatting with us, Fotini. And I'm sure the insights that you have to share with us will be super, super valuable to our booster network.
And I have a gift for you. I just remembered.
Oh.
So if you go to my website, fotiniicon.com/quiz,
Mhm.
there is a free quiz there where you can do an assessment on what is your negotiation style. And then you'll get results of, what is your style? What are the pros and what are some of the washouts of your style? So some very easy and quick tips to implement there. So I hope everybody who's listening goes and does that, because the more self-aware you are, the better negotiator you're going to be.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing that as well.